Ladies and gentlemen, in our world, we're often told that being nice is the way to succeed, to gain acceptance, to build relationships. From a young age, we're conditioned to believe that being pleasant, agreeable, and accommodating is the key to happiness and harmony. But here's the truth. Being nice isn't always what's best for you, and in many cases, it's the thing that keeps you stuck. It prevents you from tapping into your real potential. Nice is one of those words that carries a lot of weight in society, and yet it's rarely questioned. From a young age, we're taught to be nice, to smile, to say please and thank you, to share, and to get along with others. Niceness is seen as a virtue, a quality that is admired. That opens doors, and that helps us fit in with the people around us. We believe that being nice will make us likable, respected, and accepted. But beneath the surface lies a deeper question. What does it actually mean to be nice, and at what cost does it come? When we think of being nice, we often imagine someone who is polite, agreeable, and considerate, someone who goes out of their way to avoid conflict and makes everyone around them feel comfortable. There's nothing inherently wrong with these traits. In fact, they're often seen as socially desirable. But the trouble begins when niceness transforms from an occasional act of kindness into a constant state of being, when being nice becomes a strategy to avoid discomfort, conflict, or rejection. The problem with this kind of niceness is that it starts to wear thin over time. At its core, this kind of niceness is not an expression of genuine kindness, but rather a form of self-protection. It is often motivated by the fear of what might happen if we say no or stand up for ourselves. So we say yes when we really want to say no. We hold back our opinions to avoid disagreement. We push down our feelings pretending they don't exist because we're afraid of how others might react if we express them. The more we engage in this type of behavior, the more we disconnect from our authentic selves and suppress our real emotions and desires. Being nice in this way is not just about avoiding conflict, it's about the deep, often unconscious need for external validation. In our quest to please others, we begin to define our self-worth based on how others perceive us. We become addicted to the approval of those around us, and in doing so, we lose sight of our own truth. The problem here is that niceness, as a form of external validation, is ultimately shallow and unsustainable. It might give us temporary relief or approval, but it doesn't create lasting, meaningful connections or a deep sense of self-fulfillment. In fact, the more we try to be nice, the more we may end up feeling disconnected from others because we're not being true to ourselves. The cultural pressure to be nice can create a toxic cycle where people-pleasing becomes a way of life. We might stay in unhealthy relationships, accept work that drains us, or neglect our own well-being because we feel an obligation to keep the peace and maintain harmony. We fear that if we stop being nice, we'll be rejected, criticized, or abandoned. But in reality, this continuous effort to please others often leads to resentment, frustration, and even burnout. We feel emotionally exhausted because we're always putting other people's needs ahead of our own, and yet we're rarely receiving the same consideration in return. The more we suppress ourselves to maintain this facade of niceness, the more we build an inner sense of dissatisfaction and disconnection. At a deeper level, being nice can also create a sense of inauthenticity. When we wear the mask of niceness, we stop expressing our real emotions, needs, and desires. Instead, we become actors in our own lives, performing roles that we think others want to see. This doesn't just limit our ability to connect with others, it limits our ability to fully know and accept ourselves. If we are always concerned with what others think, how can we ever truly discover what we think, feel, or need? Niceness can also create a barrier to personal growth. In order to grow, we must sometimes step out of our comfort zones, confront difficult truths, and engage in tough conversations. But when we are constantly trying to be nice, we avoid these challenging situations. We shy away from conflict, disagreement, or discomfort, even if facing these challenges could help us evolve. The fear of stepping out of line, of not meeting expectations, prevents us from reaching our full potential. The more we align ourselves with niceness as an identity, the more we disconnect from the power and authenticity that lie within us. The concept of being nice can transform into an armor we wear to protect ourselves from vulnerability and discomfort. It's easier to please others than it is to confront our own fears, to express our true emotions, or to stand firm in our own values and beliefs. Being nice, in the sense that it's commonly understood, can be a barrier to living an authentic life. It can keep us stuck in patterns of people-pleasing and self-sacrifice. It can prevent us from speaking our truth, setting healthy boundaries, or claiming the life we truly desire. So, before we continue to idolize niceness, we must ask ourselves, what are we really trying to protect ourselves from? And more importantly, what are we losing in the process? The real question is not about being nice, but about whether we are willing to step into our true selves to express our desires and to live without the constant need for external approval. The price of niceness often comes at an emotional, mental, and even physical cost, and yet most people don't recognize it until it's too late. We tend to overlook the cumulative toll that constantly putting others' needs before our own can have on our well-being. On the surface, niceness seems harmless. It's simply a way of being agreeable, polite, or kind. But when niceness becomes a habitual mode of operation, it starts to erode our sense of self, leading to burnout, resentment, and a profound disconnection from our own desires and emotions. One of the most insidious costs of being nice is the emotional exhaustion it creates. When we're always focused on making others happy or avoiding conflict, we begin to neglect our own emotional needs. It's exhausting to constantly monitor our behavior, suppress our feelings, and consider how every action we take will affect the people around us. Over time, this emotional labor can become overwhelming. We might tell ourselves, I don't mind doing this for others, but the truth is this constant giving without receiving can drain us. We pour so much energy into maintaining this image of niceness that we often find ourselves feeling empty, disconnected, and unfulfilled. What often goes unrecognized is that when we prioritize the comfort of others over our own, we begin to lose touch with our own desires and feelings. We stop asking ourselves what we really want and instead focus on what others want or expect from us. We can get caught up in the need to meet external expectations, whether they come from family, friends, colleagues, or society, and in doing so, we suppress our own voice. We suppress our own needs and desires for the sake of keeping the peace, and in doing so, we start to disconnect from our inner truth. This pattern leads to resentment. Over time, when we continuously suppress our own wants and say yes when we truly want to say no, we begin to build up feelings of anger or frustration. We may not express these feelings outwardly, but they accumulate quietly in our subconscious. We become resentful of the people we're trying to please, even though they may not know we're harboring these feelings. The resentment doesn't always come from a specific action someone has taken against us. Rather, it builds from the small, unnoticed moments where we've compromised our own truth and sacrificed our needs to maintain the image of being nice. This constant self-sacrifice takes a toll on our mental health as we subconsciously resent both ourselves for not speaking up and others for unconsciously benefiting from our compliance. Niceness also breeds dissatisfaction because it leads to relationships that are not based on authenticity. When we are nice for the sake of avoiding conflict or pleasing others, we are not showing up as our true selves. Instead of engaging in real, honest interactions, we present a version of ourselves that we think others want to see. This can lead to shallow, transactional relationships where both parties are maintaining facades. We might have friends or colleagues who like the nice version of us, but we may feel that they don't truly know who we are or what we really want. Over time, this disconnect can create feelings of loneliness as we yearn for genuine connection but feel too afraid or conditioned to express ourselves fully. This emotional toll doesn't just stay in the realm of our relationships with others, it can affect our relationship with ourselves as well. As we continue to suppress our own needs, we start to lose sight of our true identity. We may become so wrapped up in being nice that we don't even know what we really enjoy anymore. Our hobbies, passions, and desires are buried beneath layers of self-doubt and fear. We begin to ask ourselves, who am I, really? But we've spent so much time pretending to be someone we're not that we can no longer hear the answer. The physical cost of being nice is just as real. Studies have shown that chronic stress, such as the stress that comes from constantly trying to meet the needs of others and avoid confrontation, can have a significant impact on our health. The constant state of hypervigilance required to maintain a nice persona can increase cortisol levels, leading to symptoms like fatigue, headaches, digestive issues, and trouble sleeping. The mental and emotional toll can also affect our physical well-being. People who continually sacrifice themselves for others may also suffer from feelings of anxiety, depression, or a general sense of dissatisfaction with their lives. At a deeper level, the price of niceness can impact our sense of self-worth. When we rely on others' approval to feel good about ourselves, we become vulnerable to fluctuations in how others see us. Our self-esteem becomes tied to external validation, which is inherently unstable. If someone is upset with us, or if we feel we're not meeting someone's expectations, our sense of value can be shaken. Over time, this instability can cause us to feel as though we're never quite enough, no matter how much we give or how hard we try. Niceness, when taken to an extreme, can even hold us back from pursuing our dreams. When we are always focused on pleasing others or avoiding conflict, we can lose the courage to take risks or go after what we truly want. We become so focused on keeping the peace that we forget to ask ourselves what we want out of life. This can prevent us from stepping into our own power, taking on new challenges, or even having the confidence to say no when the situation demands it. The price of being nice is the gradual loss of ourselves. We begin to put others first in such a way that we forget who we are, what we desire, and what we need. In the end, the more we sacrifice our authenticity to maintain an image of niceness, the more we lose the very essence of what makes us whole. True happiness and fulfillment come not from being nice, but from being real, being able to set boundaries, express our true feelings, and pursue the life that aligns with our authentic desires. It's time to recognize the true cost of being nice and reclaim the power to live authentically. The biology behind our tendency to be nice is deeply rooted in our evolutionary survival mechanisms, and understanding this can help us unravel why we often find ourselves stuck in patterns of people-pleasing behavior. The drive to seek approval, avoid conflict, and maintain harmonious relationships is not merely a social construct, it is wired into our brains as a fundamental survival strategy. For much of human history, social cohesion was essential for survival. Our ancestors depended on group cooperation for safety, food, and protection from predators. In these early human societies, being expelled from the group could mean death, and so the brain evolved to prioritize behaviors that fostered acceptance within the tribe. This instinct to fit in, avoid rejection, and please others is encoded in the neural circuitry of the brain. The release of certain chemicals, such as dopamine and oxytocin, reinforces behaviors that make us feel accepted and loved. These chemicals reward us when we conform to social norms, make others happy, and maintain harmonious interactions. For example, when we do something nice for another person or when we avoid conflict, the brain releases a surge of dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward. This immediate sense of gratification reinforces the desire to continue behaving in ways that ensure social approval, creating a feedback loop that encourages us to prioritize others' needs above our own. This evolutionary wiring that once served to keep us safe in small, tight-knit communities can now be a source of limitation in modern society. While these survival mechanisms were critical for our ancestors in preventing social ostracism in today's world, this instinctual drive for approval can lead to unhealthy patterns of behavior. In the modern social landscape, the stakes aren't as high. Being disliked or facing disagreement doesn't carry the same existential threat as it did when our survival was directly tied to group belonging. And yet, despite this, our brains continue to react as though social disapproval is a life or death situation. This disconnect between our biological programming and our current social environment is one of the reasons we feel such an intense emotional response to the idea of not being nice. When we feel the urge to be nice, it's often driven by an unconscious fear of social rejection, discomfort, or conflict. The brain's amygdala, which plays a central role in processing emotions, perceives potential social threats and responds by triggering the body's fight or flight response. This is why even the smallest conflict can feel overwhelming, as our brain interprets it as a danger to our well-being. The desire to be nice becomes a coping mechanism to avoid these uncomfortable feelings. In response to this fear, we override our own needs and desires to maintain peace, ultimately reinforcing the behavior. But here's the catch: while these ingrained survival instincts are designed to help us fit in, they can prevent us from growing and evolving as individuals. When we're constantly seeking approval and trying to avoid discomfort, we limit ourselves to a narrow set of behaviors. We become trapped in the pattern of seeking external validation and suppressing our true desires and emotions. This can stunt our personal development and prevent us from stepping into our full potential. On a neurobiological level, our brains become accustomed to this pattern. When we are constantly nice, our neural pathways become reinforced, making us more likely to prioritize others' needs over our own. This becomes a habitual response, almost automatic, and we start to act out of fear rather than conscious choice. Over time, this pattern can become so ingrained that we don't even recognize it. We simply act out of reflex, conforming to the script we've learned. As a result, we find ourselves stuck in the cycle of people-pleasing and self-sacrifice, unable to break free, even if we consciously want to. The problem with this brain-based programming is that it doesn't leave much room for authenticity or assertiveness. It is one thing to engage in kindness or cooperation out of genuine goodwill, but when we constantly mold ourselves to fit into the expectations of others, we lose touch with who we truly are. Our brain's reward system becomes hooked on the approval we receive from others rather than the satisfaction that comes from living in alignment with our true values and desires. This creates an internal disconnect. On the one hand, we might feel a fleeting sense of satisfaction from pleasing others, but on the other, we may feel unfulfilled, empty, or resentful because we are not honoring our authentic selves. The tendency to please others is not only rooted in fear, but also in a lack of awareness about our own needs. In modern life, where we're constantly bombarded with messages about what we should do, how we should behave, and how we should fit into social norms, it becomes all too easy to ignore what we actually want or need. We stop listening to our own intuition and instead we listen to external cues about how we're supposed to behave. We're so used to adapting to others' expectations that we lose sight of what feels right for us. Over time, this leads to the sense of emptiness that comes from living a life that is shaped by others' desires and not our own. The good news is that the brain is malleable. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize and form new neural connections, means that we can rewire our brains to act from a place of authenticity rather than fear-driven compliance. We can begin to train our brains to prioritize our own needs and desires, to recognize when we are acting out of fear, and to choose a different path. This is not an overnight process, but with practice we can learn to override the automatic fear-based responses and replace them with more empowering and self-respecting behaviors. When we consciously choose to break the cycle of people-pleasing, we begin to activate different neural pathways that are associated with assertiveness, self-empowerment, and authenticity. The more we practice saying no, setting boundaries, and expressing our true feelings, the stronger these neural pathways become. Over time, we start to feel more comfortable in our own skin, more confident in our choices, and more connected to our true desires. It takes time and effort, but rewiring the brain is possible. We have the power to create new, healthier patterns of behavior that are more aligned with who we really are, rather than being driven by outdated survival mechanisms that no longer serve us. The role of fear in our tendency to be nice is one of the most powerful forces that shape our behavior. At the core of people-pleasing lies a deep-seated fear of rejection, judgment, and disapproval. This fear is so ingrained in our psyche that it often operates unconsciously, influencing our decisions, interactions, and even our perception of ourselves. The fear of not being liked, the fear of upsetting others, and the fear of creating conflict can drive us to go to great lengths to maintain an image of being nice, even at the expense of our own needs, boundaries, and authenticity. This fear of rejection is rooted in our evolutionary past, where social acceptance was crucial for survival. In tribal communities, being ostracized or rejected could mean a loss of resources, protection, or even life itself. As a result, our brains are wired to perceive social rejection as a threat. The amygdala, which is responsible for processing emotions, especially fear, is highly sensitive to any situation that might cause social harm. This sensitivity is so powerful that it often leads us to act out of fear, even when the situation doesn't justify it. For many people, the mere thought of being disliked or facing conflict is enough to trigger a stress response. This can cause us to suppress our true feelings, avoid expressing our needs, and ultimately lose sight of who we are in the process. When we suppress ourselves in the name of being nice, we avoid confronting our fears. Instead of addressing the root causes of our discomfort, like the fear of conflict or rejection, we silence ourselves in order to keep the peace. This avoidance becomes a temporary coping mechanism, but over time it has a cumulative effect on our mental and emotional well-being. The fear of rejection often leads to a distorted view of ourselves. We may come to believe that our worth is contingent upon how much we can do for others or how much we can please them. We start to measure our value based on external approval instead of internal validation. This leads to an unhealthy cycle where we constantly seek affirmation from others but never truly feel secure in who we are. We may bend over backwards to meet the expectations of others, thinking that by doing so we will earn their approval and love. But in reality, this constant striving for approval only deepens the sense of insecurity because it is based on an unstable foundation. The approval we receive is conditional and external, rather than being rooted in self-acceptance. Fear of conflict compounds this issue. The idea of confrontation or disagreement can feel terrifying because it may lead to emotional discomfort or even a rupture in relationships. We often equate conflict with failure, rejection, or loss. As a result, we avoid difficult conversations, disagreements, or setting boundaries because we fear the consequences. This tendency to avoid conflict may manifest in subtle ways, such as agreeing with others even when we don't fully agree, overcommitting ourselves to avoid saying no, or failing to voice our true opinions out of fear of disagreement. In the short term, avoiding conflict may feel like a relief, but in the long term, it can erode our sense of integrity and cause a buildup of resentment because we've neglected our own truth in order to protect ourselves from discomfort. But the problem with living in constant fear of rejection and conflict is that it keeps us trapped in a cycle of self-suppression. The more we suppress our authentic selves, the more we distance ourselves from our true desires, values, and needs, we become so preoccupied with avoiding conflict or disapproval that we lose sight of who we really are. And when we constantly put others' needs ahead of our own, we may feel like we're helping, but in reality, we're depleting ourselves emotionally and mentally. This kind of emotional depletion is unsustainable and can eventually lead to burnout, resentment, or feelings of deep dissatisfaction. The fear of rejection and conflict is not only a barrier to living authentically, it's also a barrier to growth. In order to grow as individuals, we must be willing to step outside of our comfort zones, challenge our fears, and confront difficult situations. Personal development requires that we face discomfort head-on, whether that's by speaking our truth, setting boundaries, or saying no when it's necessary. Avoiding conflict and fear of rejection prevents us from developing resilience, self-confidence, and a sense of inner strength. We remain stuck in patterns of people-pleasing because we haven't allowed ourselves the opportunity to face the discomfort of confrontation and rejection. When we are constantly driven by the fear of others' opinions, we lose the opportunity to express our full range of emotions, desires, and opinions. We become constrained by what we think others will approve of, and in doing so, we shrink ourselves. We may fear that if we speak up, we'll offend someone or risk their approval. But in reality, this fear-based approach only leads to more confusion, frustration, and ultimately, disconnection. The first step in overcoming this fear is to acknowledge it. We must become aware of the moments when we're acting out of fear rather than authenticity. It's important to recognize when we're compromising our values or avoiding conflict because we're afraid of the emotional fallout. Once we identify these moments, we can begin to consciously choose to face the discomfort of being true to ourselves. This means having the courage to express our feelings, set boundaries, and say no when it's necessary. It may feel uncomfortable at first, but over time we build confidence and resilience. We must challenge the belief that conflict or rejection is something to be feared. Conflict, when handled respectfully and with honesty, can lead to growth and deeper connection. Rejection is not the end of the world. In fact, it's often a sign that we're asserting our boundaries and standing up for our needs. By reframing our view of conflict and rejection, we can begin to release the grip that fear has on our lives and take back control of our own self-expression. Overcoming the fear of rejection and conflict doesn't mean we stop being considerate of others. It means we stop allowing fear to dictate our actions. It means choosing authenticity over compliance, truth over approval. And in doing so, we allow ourselves to evolve into the powerful, authentic individuals we are meant to be. The desire to fit in and be accepted by others is one of the most deeply ingrained aspects of the human experience. From the moment we are born, we are hardwired to seek connection with others, and for much of our evolutionary history, our survival depended on the ability to cooperate and be accepted within social groups. Social rejection, whether real or perceived, activates the same areas of the brain that respond to physical pain, and this reaction speaks to the primal nature of our need for social validation. In this context, the pressure to be nice is often driven by an underlying subconscious need to maintain social belonging, avoid judgment, and preserve our social identity. The need to fit in and gain approval can lead to an unhealthy dependency on others' opinions. As we navigate social situations, we begin to shape our behavior, actions, and even thoughts based on the expectations and judgments of those around us. This is not necessarily a conscious decision, but a natural response to the desire for acceptance. Over time, this external focus on pleasing others becomes a filter through which we view ourselves and our world. Instead of making decisions based on our true desires or values, we make choices that we believe will gain us approval or prevent disapproval. We begin to lose touch with what we truly want and need, becoming more attuned to the perceptions of others than to our own inner voice. This desire to please others becomes a default mode of operation. We may overextend ourselves in an effort to gain approval, saying yes to things we don't really want to do, taking on responsibilities that drain us, or pretending to agree with opinions or actions we don't truly support. All of this is done in an effort to maintain peace, avoid conflict, and ensure we are liked. Yet, this is a precarious way to live because it depends entirely on external validation. Our sense of self-worth becomes tied to how others see us, and when that approval is not forthcoming, we experience feelings of inadequacy, anxiety, and even shame. The more we seek external validation, the more we disconnect from our authentic self, which in turn only increases the sense of emptiness and frustration we feel when the approval doesn't come or when it's fleeting. The problem with relying on external validation is that it is not only unreliable but also highly unpredictable. One day we might receive praise or admiration from others, and in that moment we feel validated and worthy. But the next day, a slight change in others' attitudes or opinions can leave us feeling inadequate or rejected. The cycle of needing approval from others becomes exhausting because it is based on something unstable and external. No matter how much we try to please others or gain their approval, it will never be a constant source of fulfillment. The truth is, the more we tie our self-worth to the opinions of others, the more we place our happiness and peace of mind in the hands of people who may or may not even have our best interests at heart. This constant striving for approval often leads to a lack of boundary setting. When we prioritize others' needs over our own, we may find it difficult to say no or assert ourselves in situations where we are uncomfortable. Instead of protecting our own time, energy, and emotional well-being, we allow ourselves to be stretched thin in an effort to please everyone around us. We become so focused on maintaining the peace and keeping everyone happy that we sacrifice our own needs and desires. Over time, this builds resentment, as we feel drained and unappreciated for the effort we put into making others happy. But because our self-worth is tied to their approval, we continue to perpetuate the cycle of overextension and self-sacrifice, often at the cost of our mental and physical health. This lack of boundary setting doesn't just cause personal dissatisfaction, it can also negatively impact the quality of our relationships. When we are constantly people-pleasing, we may attract people who take advantage of our willingness to give and do for them. These relationships are often imbalanced because we are not presenting our true selves or clearly communicating our needs and boundaries. Instead, we create dynamics where others rely on us to meet their needs while we neglect our own. This imbalance can lead to feelings of exploitation, and the more we fail to assert ourselves, the more we contribute to the cycle of dissatisfaction in our relationships. The deeper the resentment grows, the less authentic the relationship becomes, and the more likely it is that we will start to feel disconnected, unfulfilled, or even bitter. The obsession with approval and external validation is a form of self-doubt. When we seek validation from others, we are essentially asking them to tell us that we are worthy or that we belong. This can be a sign of insecurity, a lack of self-confidence, or a fear that we are not enough on our own. The more we rely on external validation, the more we reinforce the belief that we are not complete or worthy without others' approval. This makes it nearly impossible to feel secure in ourselves because we are constantly measuring our worth by the ever-changing barometer of others' opinions. This is where the path to true empowerment begins, by shifting the focus from external validation to self-validation. True confidence and fulfillment come from within. When we learn to validate ourselves through self-compassion, authenticity, and personal integrity, we can begin to break free from the cycle of seeking approval from others. This doesn't mean that we disregard the opinions of those we care about, but it means we no longer allow their judgments to define us. We can choose to act in ways that align with our values and desires, regardless of how others may perceive us. When we start to prioritize our own feelings and needs, and we give ourselves permission to say no or set boundaries, we free ourselves from the weight of external expectations. The process of shifting away from a reliance on approval is gradual, but it is essential for living an authentic, fulfilling life. It begins by becoming aware of the times when we are people-pleasing, noticing the underlying fears and insecurities that drive that behavior, and then consciously choosing to act in a way that honors our own needs. This might involve having difficult conversations, saying no when we feel overextended, or expressing our true feelings even when it risks disapproval. Over time, we can strengthen our sense of self and self-worth, and we will no longer be dependent on the fickle opinions of others to determine our value. The more we practice self-validation, the more we create space for real, authentic relationships based on mutual respect and understanding. And ultimately, the more we step into our own power and reclaim the life we deserve. One of the most subtle yet profound consequences of being overly nice is the long-term impact it has on our personal growth and the development of our true identity. When we focus excessively on pleasing others and maintaining an image of politeness and agreeability, we unconsciously put the needs of others ahead of our own, which ultimately stunts our potential to evolve and grow into our most authentic selves. By constantly suppressing our desires, opinions, and emotions in favor of what others expect from us, we create a life that is shaped more by external influences than by our own genuine aspirations and inner truth. At the heart of this issue is the fact that personal growth requires us to step outside of our comfort zones, to take risks, and to challenge ourselves to confront difficult situations and emotions. Growth demands that we assert our boundaries, express our true feelings, and take actions that align with our deepest values, even when doing so feels uncomfortable or risky. But when we are trapped in the cycle of people-pleasing, we become so concerned with keeping others happy and avoiding conflict that we fail to engage with the challenges that facilitate growth. Instead of taking risks, setting boundaries, or expressing our authentic selves, we continue to adapt to the expectations and desires of others, avoiding any situation that might lead to discomfort or rejection. This lack of authenticity creates a kind of stagnation. While we may maintain outwardly harmonious relationships and keep the peace in the short term, we begin to lose touch with our true desires, needs, and values. Over time, we may find ourselves wondering, who am I really? Because we have spent so much time conforming to others' expectations that we no longer know what it means to live according to our own truth. The longer we continue to suppress our authentic self in favor of maintaining an image of niceness, the harder it becomes to distinguish our own wants and needs from those of others. We lose the ability to make decisions that are aligned with our true purpose and end up stuck in a pattern of living for others rather than for ourselves. This is not just an intellectual or emotional problem, it also affects our ability to make choices that move us forward in life. Growth and success, whether personal, professional, or relational, are often built on our ability to assert ourselves, take risks, and step into the unknown. If we are constantly trying to appease others, we will limit our potential because we are afraid to confront challenges that may lead to conflict, discomfort, or rejection. Instead of pushing through fears or obstacles, we remain in our safe, comfortable bubble of pleasing others and avoiding discomfort, thereby preventing ourselves from experiencing the breakthroughs that are necessary for growth. In addition to stunting personal growth, the tendency to prioritize the approval of others over our own needs leads to an identity crisis. As we continue to suppress our true selves in favor of being nice, we begin to lose our sense of who we truly are. We may think that we're helping others by being agreeable, but in doing so, we are ignoring our own inner voice. We stop asking ourselves, what do I want, and instead focus on what does everyone else want from me. The more we give in to the pressures of pleasing others, the further we drift away from our core values, desires, and goals. Over time, this creates confusion and dissatisfaction as we realize that we are no longer living a life that reflects our true self. This loss of identity doesn't just affect our emotional well-being, it also affects our ability to achieve the things that truly matter to us. When we don't have a clear sense of who we are or what we want, we are less likely to take the actions necessary to make our dreams a reality. Personal goals and ambitions require a sense of clarity and self-direction, and when we are too focused on pleasing others, we lose sight of our own ambitions. We may find ourselves drifting through life, reacting to external circumstances instead of consciously choosing the direction we want to go. Living in a way that constantly seeks external approval can also lead to a lack of true fulfillment. We may find ourselves achieving things that others expect from us, but still feel unfulfilled because we are not doing them for ourselves. Success and achievement, when disconnected from our authentic desires, can feel hollow. We might have the perfect job, the ideal relationship, or the right social standing, but if these things were achieved at the cost of our true self-expression, they will never bring us lasting satisfaction. The success of living authentically, on the other hand, is not just about external achievements, it's about living in alignment with who we truly are, expressing our unique talents and following our own path, regardless of what others may think or expect. This disconnect from authenticity can also have long-term consequences for our relationships. Relationships based on people-pleasing are often shallow because they are built on false representations of ourselves. When we constantly hide our true feelings, opinions, and needs in order to maintain peace or avoid conflict, we create relationships that are not rooted in genuine connection. We may appear to have a wide circle of friends or acquaintances, but those relationships may not be truly fulfilling because they are based on a facade. True intimacy and connection come from showing up as our authentic selves, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, expressing our true feelings, and sharing our genuine needs and desires. Without this authenticity, relationships can feel transactional or superficial, leaving us feeling isolated and unfulfilled. Breaking free from the habit of constantly trying to please others requires a conscious effort to reconnect with our authentic self. This involves getting in touch with our own values, desires, and boundaries and learning to honor them, even when it feels uncomfortable or difficult. It means being willing to say no when we need to, standing up for ourselves, and expressing our true thoughts and emotions, even when doing so risks disapproval or conflict. In doing so, we create space for personal growth and transformation. We begin to trust ourselves more deeply, to live in alignment with our true desires, and to take the risks that are necessary for growth. Reclaiming our authenticity also allows us to experience deeper, more fulfilling relationships. When we show up as our true selves, we attract others who resonate with our authenticity and who appreciate us for who we really are. These are the relationships that foster mutual respect, support, and understanding relationships where we can both give and receive without fear of rejection or judgment. In these relationships, we no longer have to compromise who we are to be loved or accepted. We are loved for who we truly are, and we can love others in the same way. The journey to living authentically and breaking free from the cycle of people-pleasing is one of self-discovery and empowerment. It is about reclaiming our right to express ourselves fully, to take ownership of our lives, and to live in alignment with our deepest values and desires. When we do this, we not only experience personal growth and fulfillment, but also create the conditions for deeper, more meaningful connections with others. The power to break free from the need for approval lies within us, and by embracing our true selves, we open the door to a life of greater freedom, authenticity, and joy. In conclusion, the journey from being overly nice to living authentically is not just a matter of changing behaviors. It's about reclaiming our power, our identity, and our ability to live in alignment with our true selves. For too long, many of us have lived in the shadow of external approval, prioritizing others' expectations and desires over our own, and suppressing our true feelings and needs in an effort to avoid rejection or conflict. But this approach limits our potential, stunts our growth, and leaves us disconnected from our authentic selves. To break free from this cycle, we must first recognize the underlying fears that drive our need for approval: the fear of rejection, the fear of conflict, the fear of being judged. We must understand that these fears are remnants of our evolutionary wiring, but they are no longer relevant in today's world. The real threat is not social rejection, but the threat of living a life that isn't true to who we really are. By confronting these fears and learning to prioritize our own needs, desires, and boundaries, we begin the process of personal growth. This means making the conscious choice to stop seeking validation from others and to start validating ourselves. It means having the courage to say no when necessary, to speak our truth, and to embrace discomfort as part of the growth process. It means creating relationships based on mutual respect and authenticity, rather than people-pleasing and compromise. The power to transform our lives lies within our own hands. When we stop being nice at the expense of our authenticity, we open ourselves up to a life of deeper fulfillment, growth, and connection. By shedding the fear-driven behaviors that have kept us trapped, we reclaim the freedom to live life on our own terms, boldly, unapologetically, and fully aligned with who we truly are. This is not just about being assertive or saying no. It's about stepping into our own personal power and living from a place of truth and integrity. The world needs the real you, not the version of yourself shaped by others' expectations. And when you begin to show up as your true, authentic self, you will not only experience greater fulfillment, but you will also inspire others to do the same.